Jane Fonda says we need to imprison white men. Jane Fonda just said, quote, "It's good for us all to realize there would be no climate crisis if there was no racism. There would be no climate crisis if there was no patriarchy."
And topple the patriarchy. Topple the patriarchy.
Patriarchy will take any kind of otherness and ask it to blame itself. So ask people of color to blame themselves if something goes wrong. Ask women to blame themselves. Okay, well, what is the patriarchy anyway? And now post-Trump, it's like, it's right there. Everybody can see it. It's the sort of global idea he's building of white male power, of white male power, of white male power.
2025 has given us a lot of things. Erivo playing Jesus Christ, Snow White becoming a flop, the worst Oscar nominations of all time, and of course, female Iron Man. But it was also the year a t-shirt kind of broke the internet. And it wasn't because it was particularly clever or offensive or even well-designed, but because Pedro Pascal wore it to a movie premiere and it said, "Protect the dolls."
And last week after the ruling, Pedro took a stand at the UK premiere of Thunderbolts by wearing this Protect the Dolls t-shirt.
Every mainstream media outlet from Newsweek to something called Betches more or less declared him the savior of masculinity. We bring this up because Pascal has become something fascinating in 2025.
But daddy is a state of mind, you know what I'm saying? I'm your daddy.
Hollywood's official mascot for what they're calling non-toxic masculinity, which, when you think about it, is like calling water non-drowning liquid. The implication being that regular masculinity, the kind your father had, the kind that built civilizations and fought wars, is inherently poisonous. And Pascal is supposedly the antidote, and he's everywhere.
Yep. I am your cool, slutty daddy.
The cultural conversation around him is like watching a religious revival, except instead of finding God, we're apparently finding the cure for the disease of being male.
And I want very much to live on the right side of history, and I'm an immigrant. My parents are refugees from Chile. I myself was a refugee. We fled.
Pascal isn't actually doing anything new. He's playing the same protective father figures Hollywood has always loved, just now with the mandatory "I'm sorry for existing" energy that gets you invited to the right parties. He's definitely not revolutionizing masculinity, only apologizing for it, and Hollywood is using him as the perfect Trojan horse for something much bigger and much worse than anyone wants to admit.
I don't have to tell you things are bad. Everybody knows things are bad.
I'm going to start this off by saying something pretty obvious to a lot of people. Hollywood needs masculine men the way a vampire needs blood. Desperately, hungrily, but also with a deep existential dread about what that hunger says about them. Audiences are hardwired to respond to strength, to protection, to this primal recognition of competence that makes you think something like, yeah, this guy could probably fix my car and fight off a bear. The problem here is strong men don't take notes from focus groups. They're harder to shame into submission, more resistant to being reduced to merchandise slogans. And that terrifies an industry like Hollywood, because Hollywood is an industry built on control. Around 2010, the cultural shift we all experienced was that traditional masculine virtues didn't just become unfashionable, they transformed into moral failings. Competition became toxic now. Taking charge became mansplaining, which is apparently different from regular explaining because reasons. In 2019 at the Berlin Film Festival, Jonah Hill basically positioned himself as one of our cultural philosophers on masculinity. His profound insight was that traditional masculine traits lead to, and I'm quoting here, horrible behavior and bad actions. But while masculine traits in actual men were being diagnosed as a societal cancer, Hollywood discovered something interesting. Those exact same traits looked amazing on women. Suddenly, every strong female character was just masculinity in a different font. They're better at fighting. Emotional suppression is good now. Refusing help is even better. Captain Marvel's entire character journey revolves around learning that emotional control. Yes, the thing we literally invented a toxic label for when men do it was her only weakness.
I have nothing to prove to you.
If you thought Hollywood's message for the last 2 decades was feminine power is valid, you'd be wrong. It's actually, ironically, Masculinity is so inherently superior that even women should aspire to it. And in this brave new world, any man displaying traditional masculine traits without a disclaimer might as well be twirling a villain's mustache. The protective father is secretly controlling. The confident leader is compensating for deep insecurity that we'll explore in Act 2. The guy who stays calm under pressure is emotionally stunted, obviously. Every masculine virtue comes with fine print explaining why it's actually terrible, like those pharmaceutical ads where the side effects take longer to read than the benefits. And we reach this peak cultural confusion with Barbie. In the film, Ken's unforgivable sin against humanity was wanting his girlfriend to pay attention to him. The BBC ran a piece analyzing this plastic doll as a symbol of toxic masculinity. His crime was apparently having feelings and not knowing what to do with them, which ironically is what happens when you spend a decade telling men that both having and not having emotions are equally problematic. But the box office has become a graveyard of films that try to apologize masculinity out of existence. Charlie's Angels was terrible. Terminator Dark Fate literally killed off John Connor to make a point. Ghostbusters 2016 turned a classic into a lecture. Men in Black International tried to gender swap its way to relevance. Batwoman collapsed under the weight of its own politics.
It will be. When it fits a woman.
The Last Jedi was so determined to subvert expectations, it gutted the very mythos it was built on. The Marvels assembled a team-up exactly 0 people asked for, and naturally, each failure met with confused Hollywood execs, wondering why audiences didn't show up for their lectures. Even Disney, the company that literally bought masculinity when it acquired Marvel and Star Wars, has quietly admitted defeat. In August, Variety reported that Disney leadership has been pressing Hollywood creatives for movies that will bring young men back to the brand in a meaningful way. The studio that owns Iron Man, Captain America, Luke Skywalker, and Indiana Jones is desperately searching for content that appeals to young men. How do you lose an entire generation when you own almost every superhero franchise in existence? It's pretty simple. You spend a decade apologizing for the qualities that made those heroes appealing in the first place. Even Disney's Fantastic Four movie, starring their golden boy, Pedro Pascal, failed to meet expectations even with the over-the-top good reviews, and even with Kevin Feige's full attention. When you can't make the Fantastic Four work with Hollywood's supposed savior of masculinity, maybe the problem isn't the characters. Maybe it's the ideology.
It's a depression. Everybody's out of work or scared of losing their job.
It's a Tuesday night premiere, and Pedro Pascal shows up with this t-shirt. Not long after, every entertainment journalist is typing the same headline with slight variations. Something about redefining masculinity or the man America needs. You know, like there was a job posting somewhere and Pascal's t-shirt was his resume. What's fascinating isn't that he wore it. Hollywood politics are as predictable as Marvel sequels, but that this specific moment probably became the thing that crowned him king of the new men. A cotton poly blend with the right words at the right time. But this is where we are now. Masculinity has become performance art, and Pascal might be its greatest performer. He doesn't just wear the shirt you see. In interviews, he talks about his anxiety with the kind of detail usually reserved for wine tastings. But Pascal understands something about this moment that other actors are still figuring out. There's this sweet spot in modern Hollywood where you can maintain all the benefits of traditional masculine appeal, the jawline, the roles, while constantly apologizing for having them. It's kind of like being rich but talking about how money doesn't matter. You get to keep the mansion, you just have to feel bad about it in public. Men's Health magazine, which I remember used to be about, health, called him a symbol of resistance against toxic masculinity. Kind of like how masculinity is an occupying force and Pedro Pascal is broadcasting from a pirate radio station in the hills. But what exactly is he resisting though? Because from where I'm sitting, it looks like he's going along with everything Hollywood wants. Every approved opinion, every sanctioned emotion, every carefully curated vulnerability, delivered on schedule like a subscription box for feelings. He's figured out that you can appear brave by taking positions that require zero courage on stuff everyone around you already agrees with.
It's unbelievable. I can't believe it.
In July 21st, a publication called Betches posted a piece about Pascal, And yes, adults read this. Apparently, we've given up on dignity entirely. But they wrote something revealing. They called him a type of masculinity that finally feels safe, soft, and self-aware. When did we start needing our masculinity to feel safe? Isn't the whole point of masculine energy, traditionally speaking, to make others feel safe? To be the thing standing between danger and the people you protect? But see, protection is also complicated now. Pascal protects, sure, but only the pre-approved groups, only with the correct language, only in ways that photograph well for social media. But the same article calling him safe spends multiple paragraphs describing his biceps. They want the aesthetic of danger with the politics of a kindergarten teacher. And this contradiction shows up everywhere Pascal goes. He plays the Mandalorian, a literal warrior who kills people for money. But off screen, the media writes and talks about him like he's fighting masculinity. They think is a cancer that needs chemotherapy. He's built a career on playing protective father figures, while the media simultaneously use him to argue that traditional fatherhood is outdated. Reminds me of those Soviet show trials where people would confess to crimes they didn't commit because confession was the only path to survival. Pascal has perfected the masculine apology tour. Yes, I'm strong, but I acknowledge that strength is problematic. Yes, I'm protective, but only in ways that don't reinforce patriarchal structures. Yes, I'm successful, but let me tell you about my anxiety disorder. Hollywood eats this up because it solves their problem. They still need leading men. I mean, try making an action movie with someone who actually embodies their stated values about masculinity and see how that box office looks. But they also need those leading men to constantly signal that they know their own existence is problematic. Pascal is their solution. He looks like what they need him to look like, then says what they need him to say about looking like that. It's perfect, it's empty, and to them it's sustainable. But of course, the real tragedy isn't what this does to Pascal. He's getting paid, he's getting roles, he's fine. The tragedy is what this performance teaches everyone watching. Strength is something to apologize for. That protection is oppression, unless properly credentialed. That the only acceptable form of masculinity is the kind that comes with air quotes and a disclaimer. There's something almost beautiful about how perfectly Pascal embodies this movement. He's not a person anymore, he's a brand, the sensitive warrior, the crying protector, the man who's strong enough to admit he's weak, which is somehow supposed to be the real strength, except it's not strength at all, it's just marketing. I think about the actors from previous generations, not even that long ago. Mark Wahlberg is notorious for avoiding politics in public. Clint Eastwood made whatever movie he wanted and never really cared if you were offended. These aren't perfect men, they were just actual men. And we're definitely not focus grouped approximations of what men should be, according to people who hate men. Now, we get actors treating their emotional dysregulation like Nobel Prize-worthy achievements. We get masculinity, as interpreted by people who think masculinity is the problem. Pascal is the model of modern masculinity, but models aren't real. They're representations, what someone else decided the thing should look like. We have to accept the fact that Pascal isn't showing us what masculinity is. He's showing us what Hollywood's HR department wishes it was. The whole Pascal trend has told us that he is the model of masculinity America needs. But he's not. He's the model of masculinity that America's cultural establishment can tolerate. And the distance between those two things tells you everything about why young men are checking out of a society that celebrates their weakness and pathologizes their strength. But his perfectly curated masculinity is a symptom of something much more destructive happening to actual men in the real world. While entertainment journalists celebrate their sensitive warrior king, the stats tell a different story about what this war on masculinity is actually accomplishing.
I'm as mad as hell, and I'm not gonna take this anymore!
So Hollywood and the mainstream media has all but admitted that Pascal, this perfectly nice, constantly weeping guy, has become the template for what men should aspire to be in 2025. Which would be fine, I guess, if it was working. If young men were thriving under this new model of masculinity that looks like a therapy session had a baby with an apology letter. But male college enrollment just cratered to 40%. For the first time in American history, women outnumber men on campus by margins that would have triggered congressional hearings if the genders were reversed. Testosterone levels have dropped 38% since the 1980s. Sperm counts are down by half. We're literally becoming weaker while being told that weakness is strength. This obviously isn't coincidence. When you spend a decade telling young men that everything natural about them is problematic, that strength is toxic and confidence is oppression, you don't get better men. You get broken ones. And broken men don't build civilizations, they abandon them. And nobody wants to connect these dots because connecting them would mean admitting that we broke something that didn't need fixing. And Hollywood was doing most of the breaking. 10 years ago, they discovered something powerful. They figured out that insecure people make the best customers. Confident men don't click on feminism articles. They don't need celebrities to validate their existence. They're terrible consumers because they're too busy actually doing things to worry about whether those things are problematic. So the entire entertainment industrial complex pivoted. Luke needs to be destroyed to make way for Rey. Indiana Jones needs a girl boss to help him do the things he was supposed to be good at because 40 years of experience means nothing compared to the correct chromosomes. They turn masculinity into something that needs constant apologies. But nature hates a vacuum, especially a masculine-shaped one. When you tell an entire generation of young men that everything naturally male about them is toxic, someone's gonna come along and say it isn't. Joe Rogan signed a $250 million deal essentially for letting dudes talk about hunting without trigger warnings. Jordan Peterson became a global phenomenon by dispensing advice your dad would have given you for free if we hadn't spent 20 years calling dad advice patriarchal. They treated the symptom like it's the disease, missing the point so spectacularly you'd think they were doing it on purpose. Los Angeles just spent the last decade transforming itself into the world's most expensive social experiment. They elected prosecutors who won't prosecute, defunded police while decriminalizing theft, prioritized diversity hiring in their fire department. Then the fires came, and for some reason, nobody cared about the firefighters' preferred pronouns. Nobody asked if the emergency response team had done their DEI training. When 100-foot flames started eating Malibu mansions, the only question that mattered was whether someone could carry 100 pounds of gear up a hill without stopping to journal about it. This shouldn't really surprise anyone who doesn't mistake performance for reality, but when you prioritize looking progressive over being competent, well, you see what happens. The same people who spent years saying masculinity is toxic were suddenly desperate for toxic masculinity to show up with a fire hose and save their car. Most reboots now systematically take every hero who used to inspire boys to be brave and turn them into cautionary tales about the dangers of confidence. The executives at Disney know their numbers are catastrophic. Netflix knows nobody's watching their lectures, but they can't stop because stopping would mean admitting they were wrong about something fundamental. It would mean acknowledging that millions of years of evolution don't care about your opinion pieces. So they double down. More Pedro Pascal. More content that treats traditional masculine virtues like character flaws. More think pieces about how wonderful it is that men are becoming weaker, sadder, and more apologetic. They keep fighting reality, and reality doesn't lose. But we all know how this ends because even the people pushing this stuff don't believe it when it counts. When the power goes out, when the riots start, when someone needs to stand between danger and their family, nobody's checking to see if the person helping them has properly interrogated their privilege. That's the tell. That's how you know it's all performance. Because in the end, when the abstractions meet reality, when the theories hit the pavement, when actual strength is required instead of the carefully curated appearance of it, everyone knows exactly what kind of masculinity they need. They need exactly what they've been trying to destroy. The pendulum's already starting to swing. You can see it in the numbers. Trump's return, the collapse of every movie that lectures its audience. You can see it in young men checking out of institutions that hate them and building their own spaces. You can see it in the panic from Hollywood, the desperate attempts to make Pedro Pascal happen. Like, if they just show us enough male tears, we'll forget what strength looks like. But men haven't forgotten. They've just been waiting for permission to be strong again without apologizing for it, to build things without issuing disclaimers, to protect what matters without checking if it's problematic first. And when that permission finally comes, from the culture finally exhausting itself with its own contradictions, the correction will be swift and it will be decisive. You can't build a civilization on Pedro Pascal's masculinity. You can't defend one with it either. You can write think pieces about it. You can give it awards and celebrate it on social media. But when reality comes knocking, when the power grid fails, when the economy collapses, when the barbarians are literally at the gates, you're going to want John McClane, not whoever Pedro Pascal is playing this week. Hollywood knows this. They've just decided that the appearance of virtue matters more than actual virtue, that looking progressive matters more than making money, that apologizing for masculinity matters more than celebrating what makes it necessary. But audiences know better. They always have. That's why they keep showing up for movies that respect masculine virtue and staying home for movies that apologize for it. That's why John Wick is a franchise and Charlie's Angels is a punchline. That's why men like Pedro Pascal are celebrated in think pieces, but men like Tom Cruise sell tickets. The war on masculinity is revealing exactly why we needed masculine virtues in the first place. Every attempt to fix men just proves how much we need them unfixed. Pedro Pascal will go back to being a character actor, and everyone currently tweeting about toxic masculinity will pretend they never did, just like they pretended they always supported the firefighters they spent years calling problematic. Because that's the ultimate irony in all of this. The people who hate traditional masculinity the most are the ones that depend most on its protection. They live in bubbles maintained by hard men doing dangerous jobs. They tweet about the patriarchy from buildings built by men who never heard the word. And most of all, they've mistaken the safety created by strength for evidence that strength isn't necessary. That mistake is becoming very expensive. And unfortunately for them, Pedro Pascal's tears won't pay the bill.